This is the CN Tower, and for nearly half a century, it has been the defining symbol of Toronto's skyline. From Drake filming his music videos here to being named one of the 7 new wonders of the modern world, but you have not seen it in the way that I'm going to show it to you today. From the 50-year transformation of the Skyline, how a steam engine landed at its base, the almost 2025 World Series champions, and who looked at the edge of this thing and thought, yeah, I need to walk around that. Let's begin. I don't think there is a single landmark that screams Canada, at least to me anyway, as much as the CN Tower. I think it is the absolute flagship icon of the country. And the story behind it is honestly so fascinating. And if you love a good pissing contest like me, well, there is no better than this right behind me. To celebrate Canada's centennial for the 100th anniversary in the 1960s, the Canadian Railways were planning to build bigger and build better. And so the Canadian National Railway would build the original CN Tower in downtown Edmonton in 1966, and that would also play host to all their passenger trains going east towards Winnipeg, west towards Vancouver, and northwest to probably my favorite spot in the country, Prince Rupert, British Columbia. Now, the Canadian Pacific would answer back 3 years later by building the Calgary Tower in 1969 on top of the previous Calgary station, and what a beautiful station it was. It's a shame it's not around anymore. But like any good pissing contest, the Calgary Tower would double the height of the Edmonton CN Tower and also play host to trains heading east through Regina, Moose Jaw, Brandon, and into Winnipeg at the Canadian Pacific Higgins and Main Station, as well as going west to the Rockies in Banff, Lake Louise, Revelstoke, and on to Vancouver. But the Canadian National would have the last laugh and the last word a couple years later when they began construction on the CN Tower here in Toronto in 1972, and when she opened in 1976. This was the tallest structure in the world, still to this day, the tallest structure in the Western Hemisphere. And boy, if there was ever a story that embodies mine is bigger than yours, this is literally it. Although it didn't play host as a passenger station to all the trains heading west and east out of Toronto, it was the most recognizable and the first icon, the first landmark that you would see coming east into Toronto, and it was the last thing you saw heading west by train. Now, to say the CN Tower is a best-kept secret, it's a bit of a stretch. But I want to show you some of the best-kept secrets from within it. And you have to start with the elevator that takes you half a kilometer into the sky. Now, technically there are stairs if you are feeling ambitious, but I was not, especially in the Toronto heat. And if it does feel like the tower is moving, well, it's actually because it is. The tower is designed to sway and withstand winds of up to 260 miles an hour coming off the lake. An 8.5 magnitude earthquake, and the roughly 100 lightning strikes a year that hit it. And at the main observation deck, you are now standing roughly 114 stories above the streets of downtown Toronto. Now, if this is still not high enough for you, you can go up an additional 33 stories to the top. But what most people don't know is that this entire space was actually home to a giant disco from 1979 until 1993. Now, your eyes are not playing tricks on you. Those are in fact people hanging off the side of the tower. And this is called the Edgewalk, which gives you a hands-free walk along the edge of the roof of the main tower. Now, personally, I'm good. I think I'd probably poo myself before getting to the edge of this thing. But you let me know down in the comment section below. Would you do the Edgewalk? And from up here, Toronto looks pretty small. Down the tracks sits Union Station, which opened in 1927 and is almost like a mini version of New York's Penn Central Station. And across the street from the station stands one of Canada's grand railway hotels, the Royal York, built by the Canadian Pacific Railway in 1929. And across the tracks lies Scotiabank Arena, the former Air Canada Centre and home to the Toronto Maple Leafs and Toronto Raptors. Rising nearby is the Pinnacle 1, which will become Toronto's tallest building upon completion, which is still dramatically shorter than the CN Tower. Looking south towards Lake Ontario sits Roundhouse Park, which is the former Canadian Pacific John Street Roundhouse, and this was the biggest roundhouse in the entire country, capable of servicing 32 locomotives when it was operational. Beside that sits the SkyDome, home of the Toronto Blue Jays, and you'll also see ferries crossing the harbour towards the Toronto Islands, Billy Bishop Airport, Etobicoke, and behind that is the town of Mississauga and the Toronto Pearson Airport. And directly below the tower towards the east sits the last railway hotel ever built in Canada. And it's one that most people do not know about, but it's also the one that I'm staying at. When the Canadian National completed the CN Tower in 1976, they could not stomach the idea of sending passengers to the Canadian Pacific Hotel across the street from Union Station. So they would build one better. Construction began in 1982, and the hotel would open in 1984 as Le Hotel. And I don't think it was an accident, but it was one floor higher than the Royal York, and it would rebrand as the Intercontinental Toronto Centre in 1993, as you see today. And inside, this place is spectacular. The big, wide-open lobby with that morning light pouring in through the windows. It's pretty nice. Now, this is what my room looked like, with lots of pillows for me to spoon later tonight, and also not a bad view either. And if you've seen any of my videos before, you know I have a slight obsession with trains. And if you are staying at the Intercontinental, the greatest train journey in the world is literally steps away from the hotel. Last year, I took my mom and I on the Canadian here out of Union Station. And while most people take the Via Rail Canadian from Toronto to Vancouver, if you want to save a few dollars and see the real scenery, you want to get off in Jasper National Park and take the Spadina train that runs northwest to Prince Rupert. It's one of the most overlooked train journeys anywhere on the continent, and passing by Mount Robson, the tallest peak in the Canadian Rockies, crossing towering trestles, following raging rivers, through the coastal mountain ranges and through thick rainforests towards the Pacific coast in Prince Rupert. It is hands down my favorite train journey in this country, and a journey that my mom and I still talk about to this day. And while taking a train across Canada might be the best excuse to come and visit Toronto, the Roundhouse Park that I mentioned earlier has something almost as cool. So the beautiful engine sitting behind me is Canadian National 6213. She was a Northern class locomotive and was the biggest class of engine ever built for the Canadian National Railway when she went into service in 1942. Now, she was primarily a freight hauling engine, but you'll notice, and this is one of my favorite things, one of the favorite features of her, is those beautiful elephant ears, which are essentially smoke guards to prevent the exhaust from coming behind and hitting passengers when she was running steam excursion operations, literally right down the road here out of Toronto Union Station. There's just something about the Canadian National class of locomotives that are just so sexy, for lack of a better term, and the color scheme too, the white trim on the wheels. God, they don't make them like they used to. Now, 6213 is the second largest steam locomotive still standing in the country, which is just behind the Selkirk locomotives that operated for the Canadian Pacific. And I got a chance to see 5931, which is the last Selkirk class engine in the country, in Calgary last month at Heritage Park. And that is a beautiful machine, but in my opinion, I think this girl takes the cake. And she is also 20 tons heavier than the largest operational engine in the country, and that is CN 6060, stationed in Stettler, Alberta at the Alberta Prairie Railway, which I got a chance to see that engine also last year, and I am 6'5" and I am dwarfed in comparison to the size of that engine, and this girl behind me is even bigger. And in a time where we have destroyed and torn down so many beautiful train stations, hotels, and scrapped so many gorgeous locomotives, to have one like this right here outside the CN Tower, what a treat it is. And the only thing that would make it better is if this girl was still running. A man can dream, can't he? Although I do love the touch of the original coal tower, the coal hopper stationed right on top of her. That is just such a nice touch. God, they are so sexy and just a tribute to a time when steam reigned supreme. And this engine is just one component of the Toronto Railway Museum here at Roundhouse Park. From historic passenger coaches to diesel engines, this entire museum is within the original 1929 Roundhouse. And to say that the view has changed a little bit since then, maybe a bit of an understatement. Since then, the Roundhouse has been converted into a brewery, and the museum also does have a mini train, which, although it doesn't quite reach the 100 kilometers an hour top speed of engine 6213, it's a pretty fun ride. None of this is possible without the vacation of the railways from their yards, with the Canadian Pacific here at the John Street Roundhouse and the Canadian National at the Spadina Roundhouse, which is located exactly where Rogers Centre is today. Now, the SkyDome follows the exact same formula of every other major sporting venue in Canada. So when the railways would leave and vacate their downtown yards, sporting venues were built on top of it. So in Vancouver, the Canadian Pacific would leave their yards in Falls Creek, and in its place, BC Place, as well as GM Place, which is now Rogers Arena. In Edmonton, the Canadian National would leave their yards, and then Rogers Place was built on top of it, home of the Edmonton Oilers. In Montreal, the Windsor Station was vacated by the Canadian Pacific, and now the Bell Centre, former Molson Centre, was built on top of it. And then here in Toronto, the Scotiabank Arena, former Air Canada Centre, was built on the old Canadian Pacific yards. And the SkyDome behind me, I almost feel sacrilegious calling it Rogers Centre. It's always going to be the SkyDome to me, but you let me know in the comment section below, am I accepted for calling it the SkyDome? That being transformed from the Spadina Roundhouse, the Spadina yards of the Canadian National, into home of the Toronto Blue Jays, the one game, two run away from being the 2025 World Series champions, right here outside the CN Tower. And if you have had a chance to go to a Blue Jays game, I went a couple years ago on Canada Day, and what an electric atmosphere. I also got to try all the foods in the TD Executive Suite, which is kind of cool. But I just love the transformation that 40 years ago, all of this was all giant railway yards and railway land, and now Rogers Centre, the CN Tower, the Railway Museum, and all of the beautiful cookie-cutter glass box apartments that surround it. And instead of watching the Jays game tonight from inside the stadium, I thought, why not from above? So I headed back up the tower for dinner at 360 Restaurant. And this is exactly as it sounds. The dining room rests on a single horsepower motor that does a complete revolution of the dining room every 72 minutes. For starters, I went with the shrimp and corn fritters, served in a red pepper sauce, and it was pretty tasty. Now for main, I went with the 30-day aged prime rib. I mean, my mouth is just watering talking about it right now. And for dessert, I went with the hazelnut mille, which is pretty much layers of crispy puff pastry, espresso chocolate sauce, hazelnut cream, and a vanilla ganache all piled together. It was absolutely stellar, and there was also no better dessert pairing than chocolate and a straight espresso to finish. And while I couldn't quite see the Blue Jays game from here, there was a family of four sitting directly in front of me, and the dad actually brought binoculars for them to watch. I respect the commitment. After dinner, the sun would slowly begin to disappear behind the skyline and put on a phenomenal sunset show. But as beautiful as that sunset was, the next morning, the sunrise coming up from behind the tracks was even better. The first morning light absolutely lighting up the CN Tower, a fiery orange to start the day. The CN Tower is so many things. It is an engineering landmark. It is a symbol of the railway history that built the city of Toronto and our entire country. I mean, it is still the tallest structure, not only in Canada, but the entire Western world. From the evolution of the Skyline almost 50 years after opening on June 26th of 1976, and whether you want to walk on the edge of all of it, or just use it as an excuse to take your mom on a train across Canada, I hope this video inspires you to experience the CN Tower. Have you been to the CN Tower? Do you have a memory to share? Or would you try the Edgewalk? Whatever it is, please leave in the comment section below, because I would love to hear it, and I respond to all comments down there. And clearly you have come for the towers and stayed for the Travis. So why not hit the subscribe button, because I do new videos just like this every single Sunday, including some of the other great towers in our country, from the Harbour Centre in Vancouver to the Calgary Tower. I want to say thank you so much for watching, and I can't wait to see you in the next episode coming up on Sunday. I'll see you then.